difference between, you have this direct knowledge, and then you have varying degrees of knowledge as the caste system as the castes get lower and lower. You have less and less metaphysical knowledge that you're dealing with, or the application of it, and you just have more and more just pure material principle. The upper, the top of the caste, the priest caste, or the church, the ecclesia docens, the teaching church. In Hinduism, it's the Brahmins. These were the ones who were tasked with the responsibility to understand direct knowledge. They were the ones who were supposed to have the aptitudes to be able to interpret the various symbols used in religions that basically explain this direct knowledge. They were the ones to guard, safekeep, and preserve and conserve and transmit these principles to future generations in order so that the religion, and this was like the center of the religion, would remain stable. This was the job of St. Thomas Aquinas. Many people don't know this, but the Summa Theologica was not written for philosophers. The Summa Theologica was written for students who were learning philosophy. It may surprise many of you, because many of you who read the Summa Theologica may have no idea what they're saying. And yet it was meant for young, high schoolers and maybe early college kids to read in order to learn philosophy. It was supposed to be like a manual. How many people today really kind of understand that level of information? And by the way, when we're talking about young people, we mean probably either priests or teachers, kids who are interested in that profession. Not some guy who's working on the farm. Because again, there's a caste system, there's a system of various classes of people. And so people who had the aptitude for these things would have to learn about the direct knowledge, would have to be able to then conserve it and then transmit it to future generations. Because that is, the best, the way that Catholicism is best articulated and best understood is once we understand these philosophic principles. A lot of Catholic concepts like transubstantiation become much more illuminated once you kind of understand the difference between accidents and substance, things of that sort. And so it was the job of the Brahmins to preserve this metaphysical knowledge. And that was superior then to the Kshatriyas. The Kshatriyas were the warriors, they were the leaders. These were the ones who were tasked with governing and protecting. I've already mentioned the sword and the scales, to preserve internal order, as well as to propel any type of external force that might threaten the citizens of some domain. And that was their job. They were supposed to be virtuous. There were certain virtues attached to it. Their job was to make sure people lived holy lives, ethical lives, that they maintained the common good, rather, would probably be a better way to say it. And so what is associated with that group of people then was kind of the application of the metaphysical knowledge. You took all these metaphysical principles about natural law, and then you applied it to our natural situation. And so they would do things like ban incest, and they would promote traditional marriage. Things of this sort is the role of the state. Fortunately, today we don't really see that as much. And the next caste down would be the Vaishyas. The Vaishyas were the bourgeoisie, or the third estate, and these ones were tasked with, they were the merchant class, or they were tasked with economic considerations, and they were much more removed now from these metaphysical principles. They dealt with money, and that was really their livelihood. So, they had to be honest, they had to be virtuous, and so the Kshatriyas kind of were supposed to keep them in line so that they didn't become greedy, or they'd be filled with, so that everything wouldn't be consumed with the Vaishyas who were tasked again with this merchant and commerce. Not everything would be then consumed with just commercialization, which is what we see today, which is very interesting, and I'll get to that. And then the next caste is the Shudras. Alright, so the Shudras, they're like the proletariat, and they're going to be the least concerned with metaphysical knowledge, and they're the most concerned with just action. And the Vaishyas are supposed to kind of give them rules on how to regulate themselves. So you can kind of see this, or in the Kshatriyas as well, are supposed to regulate them. And so we see that of course, all of the metaphysical principles are contained in God, and in God established the church, or the Brahmins as the ones who had, or the church, the priest caste, whatever you want to call it, to preserve and protect this information and knowledge. And so contained within that, you could say eminently, that's the way Rene Guénon says it. Formally, the priest caste is tasked with initiating their own, as well as the things I just mentioned, but they're also eminently contained in it the power to bestow temporal authority. And we see that in every single civilization, that the rites of initiation for the kshatriyas, for the kings, for the shogun, whatever. Let's see, what other civilizations can you guys think of? The emperor in China, whatever. I don't know the situation there as well, but whatever traditional civilization you can think of, it was always the spiritual center. Whoever the Brahmins were, they were the ones who kind of kinged them. Who literally in the West, they literally kinged them. They were the ones who were tasked with initiating, bestowing upon them divine right. And so while maybe their birth kind of gave them the blessing from, or you could say it kind of gave them the foreshadowing that they were meant to be leaders just by nature of their birth, the fact that the king was the one who coronated them bestowed upon them legitimacy. That which is greater cannot come from that which is lesser. This is just a principle of numbers. This is a principle of hierarchy. That is why democracy is failed. That is why it is flawed, because the people who are meant to be governed cannot be the ones who are governors. The governors are distinct from those who are to be governable. God is the one who is the ultimate governor. He's the end in itself. And then he sets the church as the next rank of governors. And then the church establishes or coronates the kings. And now the kings are not supposed to, of course, or rather the church isn't there to tell the kings how to do their job. That's not what they're there to do. The church is there to correct them if they were to err in spiritual things, or if they were to do things that are evil. They could put countries on interdict if a country was doing something evil. I think saying King John, was it King John of England, was like a really evil king. I think the Pope put the whole country on interdict, shut it down basically, stopped having sacraments until things could be settled. They would excommunicate kings that were not being submissive to Rome, which was a big deal back then, because that basically removed then their divine right. That meant a lot to the kings. They needed like the blessing of God, the blessing that it was this sign of legitimacy being bestowed upon them. That is why all the leaders in democratic countries, it's very difficult to basically make sense of where their legitimacy comes from. Because it seems like all legitimacy has to come from God, but if the church, who is the representative of God between the material realm and the celestial realm, they're kind of in the middle there, they're not the ones who are kind of bestowing that authority, then it's difficult to confirm that they really do have legitimate leadership on earth. It's not me telling people to disobey the federal government. I think that would be very imprudent. Alright, so going back to what I was saying, they also had the ability to give the rules of battle, the rules of engagement were decided by the church, and this is what made the war and battle noble back then. This is why there was a noble warrior caste. Nowadays, anyone can be a soldier. Nowadays, we have compulsory education. These are all signs that quantity is more important than quality. That's one of the signs of the decay of our era. So they're able to give like rules of engagement to make battle honorable and noble. They were able to settle certain and to arbitrate disputes between countries, treaties, etc. Help to settle things if there's wars between countries. And so ultimately all of Christendom, all of Europe, was united around this figure of the Pope and the teaching church and his bishops. That was the center of all of Europe. They were all united around that common pillar. And that common pillar sustained Europe up until the 1300s, when the Kshatriyas decided to revolt against the Brahmins.